Welcome to Follow Your Curiosity. Ordinary people, extraordinary creativity. Here's how to get unstuck. I'm your host, creativity coach Nancy Norbeck. Let's go. Marc Kaye calls himself a restless creative, a musician, writer, and comedian who loves to tell stories and make people laugh. He also, through his company, VitalConex, uses those skills to help develop the vital connections needed for focused, united teams and creative problem solving. Marc tells me how and why he took the leap into stand-up, how his comedy and his writing skills have influenced each other, and how he takes both of those and his business partner's therapy background and creates programs to help teams create a sense of psychological safety that lets them do difficult work from a place of greater unity. Here's my conversation with Marc Kaye. Marc, welcome to Follow Your Curiosity.
Thanks for having me.
So I start everybody off with the same question, which is, were you a creative kid or did you discover your creative side later on?
I actually prepared for this because I do listen to your podcast, and I would say, in looking back, I definitely was a creative kid for sure.
How did that manifest itself?
Well, I mean, I think so. I mean, it seems to me, having had kids of my own and being around other kids are very creative generally. But I think that I always felt like I took it to a different level. I was kind of the weirdo, or some might say, had a good active imagination. But even when I think back to a lot of the games or things that I did with my sister and my neighbor, they were all created. We used to play in the sandbox, and we had this whole story about a farmer makes us do everything. We were like being held captive, or we had to play around the tree playing witch's brew, or we'd have talent shows. And I was always into writing and music. And I don't know if it's true or not, but I do think that there's parts of you that are the same now as they were the day you were born, probably. And there's just always that kind of common thread to want to create something. And, I never was interested in watching concerts or games on television. I always wanted to be part of it. And I think there's something creative in that as well.
That's so interesting because I think that's true for a lot of us and we don't think of that as a creative thing.
Yeah, but it is, right? It really is. I think of creativity as activity, as very active, like the verb of it to create. And I think that's why a lot of times people who aren't creating art, sometimes are thought of as not being creative, but actually are incredibly creative in the way in which they're thinking about problem solving, because it's an active thing. But it's just, we've kind of scoped it in our society to fall into 3 or 4 things, and that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, if you're solving a problem, you are creating a new solution to a thing.
Yes.
But
Yeah,
we don't
totally.
think about it that way, which is crazy.
No, it is crazy. And I think kids naturally do think about things that way. I mean, that's why kids ask so many questions, because they are using creativity to ask, well, why is that the situation? Or why is that? It's very, very active. But, for a whole bunch of reasons, I think it's kind of, it's extracted out of us as we get older and learn a reward system that might not always reward that type of, approach.
Yeah. I've just started reading a book called The Extended Mind by Annie Murphy Paul. I don't know if you've heard of it, but she talks a lot at the beginning about how we're taught that our brain and our whole thinking system is only between our ears. And it's not true. There's all of these other ways that we think and experience the world and interpret information. And I'm literally I might be at the beginning of chapter 2. I'm not deep into this book yet, but it's like just that makes you really think about how we are taught to function in the world is so limited, because it's like, just think really hard and that will solve the problem. When a lot of the time that is not what will solve the problem.
No, not at all. And I see that, I don't want to get into a whole generational thing here, but it does seem to me that there's something about creativity and resourcefulness. And I find that people who can't necessarily follow a recipe or find it in a book don't understand how to be resourceful. And creativity to me is an immediate channel to being resourceful. And I just think it's so critically important in everything. But I'm also incredibly biased, so I don't know.
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
not going to have an unbiased conversation about
yeah, yeah,
that. There's
exactly.
no chance. There's no chance. So where did your creative side take you as you started getting older?
Well, I took a huge hiatus, I would say. I mean, I think I've been playing piano since I was 7. And then I was always kind of writing, I was writing since I was a kid and in high school. And I wanted to go into journalism. And then for a lot of the reasons we kind of just, I think, touched on, ended up studying science, biology and psychology because, just every message I was getting, quite frankly, was that was how you were going to get a job. Even though I really wanted to go into journalism and writing, where it ultimately took me was to nowhere land because I graduated college and then I ended up just working for the state and then and going into marketing and having kids and kind of those things fall by the wayside, unfortunately, if you don't keep up with them. And then when my kids got older, I decided to try stand-up comedy, and I was always writing throughout the whole time. And the reason I tried to do stand-up comedy was because I wanted to meet other writers. It wasn't to do stand-up comedy, but I was not anywhere in that circle, as you can imagine. And that's taken me in quite a lot of places in the past 10 or 12 years, including kind of re-engaging my musical side as well and recording music.
It's so interesting that you got to comedy through wanting to meet other writers. That's not where most people would go. How is it that that's the venue that presented itself to you?
It's very simple. I was researching on how do you write for the Daily Show, um,
Ah.
and I was like, where do these people, meet? And the reality was, at that time, I was well aged out of the typical intern or people that would start there. And it was saying that a lot of people meet each other doing stand-up comedy, albeit in New York City. But I thought, okay, at least that'll get me closer to people, like-minded people who might be writing comedy, which it did in some capacity. And that was it. And that, and also Last Comic Standing. I wrote to Gary Goldman. I don't know if you or the listeners remember, but he was one of the initial contestants on Last Comic Standing. And he literally looks like me, except he's like 6'6". And he was doing these jokes, and I just thought he was amazing. And I wrote an email to him, and he answered me, and he just said, "Just do it, just get up there and try it." And I had made a like a pact with myself that I would try it by the time I turned 40, and I was about to turn 41. And there was this, I was taking my kids roller skating. And there was a sign outside saying open mic night at the motel, and I did it, and I've been regretting it ever since. No, but that's kind of how it happened. Yeah.
Wow, that takes some serious courage to just walk into a comedy open night and just do it.
Yeah, yeah, it did. I mean, I was definitely afraid. It's funny. I don't know if you have this experience, like when you've decided to do something, creative or not, but I got to the point where I had been thinking about it, and it was almost like I had to choose between the depression of never doing something or the anxiety of actually trying it. But like it was going to be one or the other. And so when I realized I was either picking depression or anxiety, I was like, well, I might as well try anxiety because like at least I would try it. And so that's been a little bit kind of my approach for the past decade or so, not to be afraid of things that really truly aren't going to kill you. Heights, yes. Snakes, yes. Doing an open mic, you'll survive, kind of thing.
Yeah. Wow. So how did it go?
I remember it went well. I was actually shocked because believe I was number 16 and I was only in the middle of the open mic. It was on a Wednesday before Thanksgiving. And I remember
Wow.
there was a guy sitting in the front, and I don't know if you ever saw Despicable Me, the
Hmm.
movie. But what's the guy's name that with the the big black V-neck back.
Oh,
He's
geez.
the
I don't
villain, but
remember.
it's I want to say like villainous or something, or that's probably where he's from. But there was a guy that looked like him. I mean, his back was like 7 miles wide, and he was heckling people. And I thought, oh my God, like I am totally like, what am I doing? And I don't know why to this day, but he did not heckle me. And I just thought, okay, I got through it and I was kind of hooked, after that. So it went pretty
Wow.
well. Yeah.
And then did you find the community you were looking for?
Um, yes and no. I mean, I think it's difficult, like anything. I mean, to me at least, they say it's more difficult to make friends as you get older. It's more difficult and I think that there's something to that just because you have a lot of conflicting things going on in your life. You just have a much more nuanced life. And I found community. I found some very good friends there, but I don't think I would say I found community, at least in this area, at least the way I wish I would have. Yeah.
Wow.
It could be because of me as well. I'm not trying to say it's like because of the people, but it didn't. I listen to Sarah Silverman and they all hang out and and I would love to have that type of tight knit community, where it's not about the comedy, but it's about kind of connecting. And I have that with a few people, but not on a grand scale. Yeah.
So you go to an open mic, you get
Mhm.
hooked.
Yeah.
What do you do from there? Do you just keep open micing? Do you take courses? Because I know that there are comedy workshops and things like that.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
happens?
Well, I got hooked, and then I did it for a few months, and then I remember I didn't do it for 5 or 6 or 7 months. My kids were probably like 10 and 12 or something, so they were older, but they were busy, and I would only do it sort of when I didn't have any other duties at the time. But I would do open mics, and then I became friends with a couple people who would invite me to their rooms, and I would start hosting and getting hired to do things like that. And I would do it when I could. And I did take a class at the Stress Factory in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Maybe a couple years in. But mostly, what I was doing was writing, and it really wasn't until like my kids were in high school that I started performing more often. That was also the time that I was going through a divorce, so there was a,
Oh,
a big hiatus during that, because it was hard to find the funny in anything.
yeah.
Although there's lots of funny there now, but at the time, and then I that obviously, when I started up again, it revolved around the kids and things like that. But it was actually kind of a godsend at the time, which was great.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what's it like to take a class on comedy? Because I know a lot of us would think that that would take all of the funny right out of it.
Well, I think you're right. I think you would I think you would be right. You know, it's a really good question because it's a class, right? And I think it really depends on the instructor, right? So if you if you have somebody who is able to hone in and say, "Oh, this person," I always think of it as like a diagnosis, right? What this person needs is technique, or this person needs writing skills, or this person needs presence. The problem is, to be honest, anybody can say they're an instructor and a teacher, right? And so, what I would say is take a class, but watch the person and call the person, talk to them, make sure that this person is going to provide you, what you need. I've taught comedy classes now, and I'm always very super sensitive to make sure that I am providing some sort of value, because you can easily go down the rabbit hole of you suck and you shouldn't be doing this at all. And actually, when I took a class, it set me a little bit backwards because it really made me rethink a lot of what I was doing and how I was doing it. And the thing about any art form is it's very, very subjective, right? And so I think there's something to be said about what it takes to be a good writer or have good presence, or right, there are obviously things that are like that, but there's a lot of art to it as well, not science. And so I think it's hard to take a class if you don't know 100% what it is you're trying to get out of it. And I didn't do that, unfortunately, but it was still a good learning experience.
That seems like such good advice for so many different things, like to know
Yeah, I
what it
think,
is you need to get out of for
yeah,
anything in any art.
yeah, or anything like you said in life, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Because comedy seems to me like it would be even more subjective than a lot of other things. Maybe that's just my impression, because as I'm saying that, I'm wondering if that's really true.
I don't know. I also belong to a singer-songwriter circle, and it's like a critique, a song critique. And it's a little bit similar, which is I get a lot out of it, but sometimes I see people take, um, someone could play a song and there's 10 people kind of providing their input on the song, and someone could love it. And, the fact that this thing is repetitious, and another person can say, well, actually, I think you need to modulate. That's too boring. And, and at some point, I think you have to just take it in, sit with it for a while and say, what really serves you in the song? What is authentic to you? um, because again, at least the way I think of creativity, it's in its purest form. It's an expression of who you are, right? So I would never want to squeeze out who somebody really is. Just give them some things to think about and how to make things better. So I do think, to your point, it applies to lots of art forms. Comedy, I think, could be, like you said, a little more intense, but not because of comedy, but because of the comedian. We're just a very, very sensitive
Mm,
bunch.
that's true. And
Yeah.
yet I can just imagining people saying, "But what if I haven't figured out who I am yet?"
Yeah.
It can be really hard to figure out
Yeah.
what's authentic to you.
Yeah, I think that's true, but that's a great thing about writing, though. I mean, or any type of writing, songwriting, creative writing, poetry. I mean, I think, just don't overthink it. See what comes out, and in time it'll uncover itself. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the more you do of it, the more you have a sense of what what feels right and what doesn't feel right.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah. Especially if you listen to your gut.
Yeah. Well, that's the key thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. For
That's the
sure.
thing that we're not taught to do in school because our thinking all exists between our ears, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So they say. Yeah.
So they say. So I'm really curious to know how you've found that doing comedy has influenced your writing and maybe vice versa.
Mhm. Yeah, well, that's a great question. So it's influenced my writing. So I have this book of essays that I'm gonna get published hopefully soon. A is for awkward, and you cannot write an essay the way that you would tell a story in a book like that the way you would on stage. But where it has actually influenced me is that when you're doing stand up, it's not just about the words you say, it's the expressions you use, the way you act out, the way you use voices. And so it's really helped me try to think about, how do I bring some of the characters in my stories to life beyond just their words, describing them better, setting the scene better, getting to the point better. And in comedy, because people make such snap decisions, you don't I'm not a kind of comic where I feel like I can take 10 minutes to do a setup without getting a laugh yet. I mean, I would love it if I was, but I don't think that's where I am yet. And the same kind of applies to writing. I think you need to understand what is it that you need the reader to understand and when. And so it's made me think a little bit more methodically, believe it or not. And then on the reverse, I think writing has informed my comedy in that I have to learn how to not I need to economize better. I mean, one of the things I do is I can get pretty academic and descriptive, and then I can lose somebody when I'm on stage, right? There's so many distractions. So it's informed my comedy by thinking in terms of, okay, what is the main point of view? What's the main thing I need to get across here? So I think it's been a little bit of a back and forth.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's because I had never really thought of the two as as so related before. And yet, you know, the stories that you tell your friends are not
Yeah.
the kind of stories that you're necessarily going to get up and tell even at an open mic when you have no idea what you're doing. Well, maybe if you have no idea what you're doing, right? But
Yeah.
other than that, it's not like George Carlin just woke up one day and said, "Oh, I'm going to go on stage tonight and I'm just going to tell whatever story pops into my
Right.
head." That's not how it works.
Right. That's right. And in fact, I started this company called VitalConex with a friend who she's a therapist and I'm the humorist. But one of the things we do is we actually use joke mapping and humor writing techniques to problem solve because the technique itself, which is a writing technique, helps you actually kind of get to what the problem is and think of connections that you would not think of otherwise. So it's just it sounds like, oh, he gets up and he does open mic night. But like, if you kind of take it seriously, like there is kind of a process to it and it really allows you to go in different directions and see what you have. So it's been I think a skill that I probably didn't have before I tried it.
Can you give us an example of what that looks like?
A joke map? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or actually we do it with businesses too. But so I might I might have a premise and it involves a kitchen sink. And so I'll just write the word kitchen sink in the middle of a piece of paper or a whiteboard or whatever. And then we'll go around the room or I'll do it by myself and just write everything that comes to mind with a kitchen sink. So it could be a faucet, it could be water, it could be a leak, it could be dirty dishes, it could be a dump, it could be the saying everything but the kitchen sink. And then you do the same thing for each of those words. And you do that about 4 or 5 layers out. And then you might end up the fifth or sixth layer with something that seems completely unrelated to a kitchen sink, like cottage cheese or France, and you start to make these connections between the kitchen sink and France. And in those levels, you're actually creating a story. And so it can become a very funny story because you're now connecting two things, which is kind of the art of good comedy, right? Is the redirect rather. And so that joke mapping exercise, we do the same thing for problem solving. So we did one with an organization that was looking to move more into coaching, which I think is in your domain
Mm-hmm.
actually also. And that's not what they were, consultants, but not coaches. And so we started talking about what they did and put it sort of in the middle of this mapping exercise and did the same thing to try to understand what is the connection between where they are and this area, this adjacent area that they want to get into, and come up with some premises and potential business models. So it's a way of thinking that I think is not, at least something I wasn't exposed to, in any of my schooling.
It sounds like a brain map like that I used to do with writing students, but in a, only to a certain extent, because then you're going off on this wild, take it somewhere totally different piece that we
Yeah,
certainly never did to write a 5 paragraph essay for,
right.
English 101.
Yeah, I'm sure you had enough creativity in those essays as it was.
Intentional and unintentional, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's really cool though. I like that. I like the way that you take it in an unexpected direction and then see what you come up with because that's where all the wild stuff happens.
Yeah, and the other thing that I love about, and this is it is comedy, but it's its own separate category, is the use of improvisation. Because what you can then do is you can do it with or without the mapping exercise, but take those elements and assign them to different characters and use different. There's a whole bunch of different improv exercises which you may be familiar with that start to create a story, and it's fun. At the same time, you also get like ideas that you just would not otherwise generate. I mean, think about how many times the majority of my comedy that actually works, because most of it doesn't, but the majority of it comes out of unexpected places, from conversations that I have or that I hear or things that happen. It's not me sitting down at a desk and trying to make a connection. It's really that whole process again of just kind of putting everything aside and just it's connecting with other people and ideas and just being okay with being a little weird, you know.
Hmm.
And that's the stuff that I really like to do. Yeah.
Yeah. It was, for some reason, the Overheard in New York website has just popped into my head. I haven't thought about that for years. Are you
Oh
familiar
yeah.
with?
Yeah.
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 All of
Yes.
the, and there are more than just New York, or at least there were. I don't know if it
Yeah.
still exists, but the random things that you hear that undoubtedly to the people in the conversation made perfect sense, but to
Yeah.
someone who's standing there are hilarious or just
Right.
completely bizarre.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Can't
Yeah.
make it up.
You can't make it up. You really
Exactly.
can't. And Lord knows I love me some improv. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's fun. It's just, and that's what I mean when I say I think kids are, everyone is creative. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen kids that aren't improvising, when they're on the playground making, it's like those are the best stories, as even when they have toys and stuff. And that's sort of, I think, you know, the real shame of having so many devices around is it takes away from, improvisation is just another way of saying play in a way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we would be deeply disturbed if we ever saw kids who weren't essentially doing improv and making stuff up all the time.
Yeah, it's true. We have enough accountants. I don't want to see some 5-year-old in a with a briefcase and a three-piece suit.
It would just be weirdly unnatural though, I mean, it would just be like,
Anyway,
what is wrong with this kid? Even if we couldn't put our finger on what it was, we would
yeah,
know something was really wrong with that kid.
yeah, we would. Yes, I'm sure that maybe Zuckerberg was that kid when he was 5, but thank God that
Could
we
be.
have less than more, right?
Right, right. And I'm thinking of, when my older nephew was 5 and he appeared with a thing he had made out of Lego, and it was really just, a giant block made of
Yes,
Lego, and he said, "This is a cake." And
yeah,
no question in his mind. And
yeah,
and I said, "Well, of course it is." But of course, because I'm not 5, there's that little voice in my head going, "Uh-huh."
yeah,
And it's that little voice that goes, "Uh-huh," that's getting us all in trouble
yeah,
because we're looking at it going, "That ain't a cake, kiddo, but okay." And they just are all in.
yes, yeah. And and that's a piece that we really really miss as adults, is almost the suspension of belief a little bit. Not we're not, it's so funny because we suspend belief in very very dangerous ways as adults, right?
Oh yeah.
Very very dangerous ways, because it's okay, it's normalized. But in ways that really are not that dangerous, but people might think we're weird, we tend not to. And it's really so backwards, because actually it would be a much a much more fun, I think, environment to be in, where we can suspend belief in ways that it's not going to hurt anybody, but we can just have a
Right.
little laugh.
Yeah, there's a difference between suspending disbelief and being in denial.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, I think a
Exactly.
lot of us are in denial a lot of the time, whereas this is a cake
Yeah,
is
exactly.
is a
Like,
whole lot
great,
healthier. Why
it
not?
is. And who's to say it's not a cake? And it could be a cake.
Yeah,
If it's a cake for him, it's a cake. He's not going to
right.
eat it.
Exactly. I was
So,
gonna say I'm not gonna try to eat it, but
right.
otherwise it's
So
a
let it
cake.
be a cake. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
So
why not?
I know kids and dogs, they've got it figured out, I think.
And they're having more fun.
They're
So
definitely having more
clearly
fun.
they're onto something.
Kids are creative, dogs are in the moment. I mean, they got it figured out. I don't know how, but they definitely do.
Yeah, they do. The rest of
Yeah.
us though, I don't know. There's something in that growing up thing that just wrecks it.
Yeah, I think it's a common, I'm all for being an adult and responsible, and I think that's important. But the idea that that's at the, that, and this was me, I don't want to talk for everybody else, but I definitely had it in my head that there were these milestone gates. And, once you pass that gate, your identity changes. You have to, that part's got to go, like that creative part, playing piano, trying to get in a band. Like now you've got to be responsible. And there's plenty of people who balance everything. So I'm not saying that other people haven't figured it out, but I was not sewn from that cloth. And I'm there now, but we're getting there. But it's actually makes me a better human being to not have to shed that stuff on the way.
Yeah, like the whole "you're too old for that now."
Yeah.
Like,
It's what does that even mean? You
right,
know?
right. I'm
Yeah.
too old to have fun. Everything
I
has to
know.
be serious and boring. Because what's the point of living if that's the case?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think that gets wrapped up into that word responsible. Because
Yeah.
obviously, like you, I'm not advocating that we all, run off and just
Right.
never go to work again. And though I don't know, maybe there's a way to make that work. But
Some
absent
people
that,
have. Yeah.
yeah, some
Yeah.
people have certainly managed it. But I mean, there are things that definitely need to be taken care of in the world,
Yeah.
and we should do those things. But I don't think that that necessarily means that you can't go and do the other things too. That you can't
Yeah.
have fun, that you can't create, that that everything has to be serious and boring and just
Mm.
drudgery for the rest of your life, because that's not being alive.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I really would love to see more and more people go to comedy clubs. I think it's a little bit of thing in the past. I mean, there's still people that go, but it's not I mean, I remember when it was, big thing. You would go to a comedy club the way you'd go to a movie um, it's one thing you can sit at home and watch you can watch a funny comedy Netflix special and that's great. But there is something to be said, you being in a room with other people laughing. It's just there's nothing like it. And I think that goes for all kinds of activities actually. So
Yeah,
gotta get have fun. Yeah, for sure.
absolutely. I just
Yeah.
went to see Eddie Izzard a couple weeks ago
Oh
for the
yeah.
second time. And, I've seen plenty of Eddie's shows
Yeah.
on video,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there is something fabulous about being in that room. And of course, that's a bigger room. I
Yeah.
haven't been to
Where was he?
in Philadelphia.
Oh, okay. Wow. I didn't even realize that. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like the remix tour from Philly, and
Okay.
then I think New York. Not sure
Okay.
where all else, because those are the two
Yeah.
closest. But
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, it was like a friend of mine had tickets. Was like, "You want to go?" I'm like, "Yeah."
Talk about creativity. Yeah, for sure.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a brain that never stops.
No.
In
No.
multiple languages, never stops, and I suspect the multiple languages is part of why it never stops.
Oh, interesting.
In that
Yeah.
case,
Keep thinking in all these different
yeah.
languages. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was actually a segment about what works and doesn't work in different languages, and
Oh,
having to like translate bits and
yeah.
change, in
Yeah.
order to make things work in different
Yeah.
places. That was really, really interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, but that's also, like I said, in a large theater, whereas
Yeah.
a comedy club is, often a smaller place,
Yeah.
which is a different
Exactly.
experience too.
Yeah, it is. I mean, they're all good experiences. I think, say to people who are work with us at VitalConex, it's the idea is not to turn people into stand-up comics or writers. It's to just tap into what is there in all of us, but unfortunately just sometimes gets suppressed for all the reasons that we, just spoke about.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I would love to hear more about what you do with Vital Connects.
Okay, yeah, sure. So we say we're a leadership consultancy, and we focus on teams. So what we've done is, so just a little bit of background. My the co-founder is Leslie Morgan. So she and I both have worked in corporate environments for many, 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 many years, over 2 decades. And I've always worked in marketing, still do. And she worked in more operations, but in right, it was during the pandemic. We were working together and at the same company, and it was one of these things with you probably heard a lot around DEI,
Hmm.
diversity, inclusion, and we had a lot of, and these are very important initiatives for sure, but we'd always have these sort of DEI or team building or these type of initiatives, and then everything would kind of stay the same, right? It was fun, but then everything would
Yeah.
go like nothing changed. And then we have significant, like, challenges that the team would have to come together and try to solve these challenges. But it was the same challenge that we were trying to solve last year, right? And we started asking ourselves, these are really good people. These are smart people. Like, what is actually going on here? And we realized that those two things never kind of came together. So having a team that really had this foundation of trust or psychological safety, which a lot of people talk about, is so important to the creativity piece, because you're not going to do the things that you and I just talked about if you feel like you're going to be judged on your team, even if you get along
Right.
with people, right? You don't have to have the same worldview, but it's that level of respect and knowing that you're safe. And so we brought these two things together. And so we work with teams to make sure that there's really truly a foundation of psychological safety. And then we ideate and problem solve using some of the humor workshops that I put together. And we conduct workshops. Sometimes we have embedded engagements for longer, needs. And it's a lot of fun, I have to say, and it's customized each time because it's different with each organization. But it's really to try to. This is a improv, so I can't take any credit. This is from improv, but it's saying, hey, we can kind of work with you as a team, but it's best when you work as an ensemble, which is a little bit different, right? Because the team, you still have your individual roles, but the ensemble, you're one unit, and it's a more symbiotic relationship, and that's what we do. Yeah,
Wow. Because
yeah,
you're absolutely right. You can bring in every consultant in the universe, but 9 times out of 10, a year later, everything is exactly the way it was before you brought in the consultant.
yeah.
So you find that this actually makes a change?
Yeah, it's so funny because we've been really struggling, to be honest, about for while we were struggling, and how do we describe ourselves? And we were staying away from the word consultant for all the reasons you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Because we were on the opposite side, where there's some good consultants, but we had the same reaction you had, and we were like, oh, we don't want to come in and, oh, that was fun, and then there's nothing lasting. So yes, we do find, we've had clients say, um, we use a lot of different exercises, but we find that it does actually stick for two reasons. One is, the psychological safety piece. What Leslie does is she talks more about neuroanatomy, not just kind of, what we might be used to. Like, are you left brain or are you right brain? Are you creative? Or it's this idea of there's actually a thinking and a feeling brain, which is based on some neuroanatomy work. I can never say that word that's been done. But in doing that, she's really great at explaining how when we're at a work situation or in a serious situation, right? The things that we get rewarded for are from our thinking brain, almost like what you said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But the things that allow you to overcome objections, conflict, and problem solve are actually largely embedded in the feeling brain. And so we do these exercises, first of all, really kind of get to the bottom of the fact that everybody is coming into the meeting with a whole set of concerns on their shoulder that nobody else knows about to begin with, right? And that really seems to stick with people, and it was a real eye opener. I was personally afraid of getting too personal, quite frankly, in that realm, and people kept telling us that we should be spending more time on that, which tells me that we are much more alike than we think, but we just don't present that way on Facebook and LinkedIn all the time. Surprise,
Mm-hmm.
surprise. So that part really sticks. And then I use The Office or some other sometimes sitcoms and improv to actually ideate and joke map the way we did, and that's a fun exercise. So that sticks, and we leave them with some approaches that they can use for their particular team, because we always say that all HR is local. You could work for a chaotic company, but if you have a good team, that's going to make a difference, and vice versa. You can work for a great company, but if your team is all over the place, that's going to really impact your daily experience.
Right. So the DEI work is not typically something people associate with humor, right?
Exactly.
It's like big, serious, uncomfortable, unpleasant stuff.
Yeah.
So, how does it go when you talk to somebody who wants to bring you in and you say you're going to use humor? Because I can just imagine them being like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, no, and that does happen. That absolutely happens, and we address that head on. So, I mean, one of the things when we're kind of walking through what we do is we make it very clear what we do, but we make it very clear like what we don't do, right? So this isn't therapy or confession on the psychological safety side, and this isn't like improv and turning you into a stand-up comic. And it has to be done with incredible respect, right? Especially in today's day and age. What I always say to that is that if you look at there are some of the most serious things that have happened in history where leaders have used humor sort of as a to disarm, right, what is a very, very difficult situation. The goal is to not make a joke out of the situation. It's not even to find the funny in the situation. The goal is to use humor for the interpersonal connections and relationships to then allow people to be real about how to address a situation. The problem is when people feel that they can't even just be themselves and take a breath, it typically can escalate and nothing actually gets accomplished. So it's humor as sort of a channel to just disarm the relationship, not necessarily to make idle or fun of what might be a very significant situation. That being said, in the DEI space, what is interesting is that there are ways to use humor to really get to the point of what equity really means or what diversity really means when there's some people that are taking it to the extreme and are afraid to even touch it. So there are ways in which that can help there also, but it's a very good question. It's not just DEI, it's actually for a lot of things people get a little bit cautious about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of how you tackle some of those things?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that we tackled was working with a team where they were a highly functioning team. This isn't DEI example. This is just about team dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
But they were a highly functioning team. But there were two people on the team, very strong personalities, very bright, um, go-getters, ambitious, and you know a little bit of a clash, right? Just a clash of personality, which I think is common on many teams. And one of the things we did is we first did this exercise, driven by Leslie, my business partner, to really kind of talk about what basically she does very well, which is talk about the unspoken landscape, right? What's hidden underneath the iceberg, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of everybody. This is one of those times when people were actually sharing a lot more than I thought people would be comfortable with. And then I came in and I did an exercise where I used the characters of The Office and I had them all listed and I had a short description. And in that description, have you watched The Office
I
by any chance?
haven't.
Okay. So it doesn't matter. It could be any show, but for each character, they have a very strong personality, right? There's a characteristics to them that both are good and also bad. And I just kind of listed this is a strength, but the flip side of that coin is, this weakness. And we went around the room and I gave everybody a piece of paper and I said, I'm giving away my secrets here, but I said, okay, just write down who you think you are in the team based on these descriptions, right? And then I gave everyone a piece of paper and I asked them to write down who they think everybody else on the team is.
Ooh.
And we walked around and what was funny is that people started referring to themselves, even in like kind of like, when people can get touchy about their, personality traits that they know, but started referring to themselves as the character rather than as their own identity. And I think it just helped disarm and they could have a laugh about it and people could be open about it. And I think the fact that we did the first psychological safety exercise first really set a level playing field for people to realize we're really, I know it's a cliche, but we really are all trying to figure this thing out. Like none of us has it figured out. We all have our own issues, right? I mean, whether it's mental health issues or family issues, or I mean, everyone has something. And though it makes sense that everyone would know that, you don't come into the office typically and say to your team, man, I really had a struggle, with my kid on Sunday, and I'm really nervous about it. You just carry that in with you. And so being able to really level set and then come in with this exercise, I think was, it just worked out. And I know that it's something that they've continued to use.
And it's interesting. As soon as you said that, we all have stuff going on. It's like I just could feel everything in me just kind of calm down, even though I
Yeah.
wasn't in that room. There's something about acknowledging
Yeah.
that just makes everybody breathe a little bit more easily, just hearing it.
Yeah, interesting. And I wonder if it's because, I always wonder this myself, having my own team and stuff like that. I want to create that environment myself. Obviously, this is what we do, but I always feel like I get more success when I'm working with other clients than my own team. And I think it's because if it's somebody like a stranger or a third party coming in, there's no hierarchy. There's no,
Mm.
someone else is saying it, to your point, as opposed to someone that might be doing your performance review, or you have to ask something for it, and it doesn't matter how great that relationship is. That's just the work environment. There's a hierarchy there, or, a dynamic. So I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know.
There's power involved there somewhere, and that just always
Yeah.
makes it a little bit more awkward. But I think even when there is power involved there, if you have that moment when everybody can be reminded that everybody's got their own stuff,
Yeah.
it
Yep.
does help, at least to some degree. Maybe not, to completely level things, but at least to some extent, it reminds everybody that we're all human and we're all dealing with similar things.
Yes. Yeah. And that's kind of, again, what she always says this, and it really sticks with me. She says that she's a therapist, and she sees people all the time that they clearly have very different worldviews, right? They're but the Venn diagram is that they're still they have this human experience, right? They still have these feelings that create thoughts that create the way in which we see the world. And so, what I think we're trying to get to, I don't know about you, but I grew up during a time, particularly in a work environment, where it was seen as being bad to be emotional or talk about feelings, especially at work. And the reality is, I'm not talking that people need to be girl interrupted or falling like Michael Douglas falling down, right? But work is extremely emotional. This is how people make their livelihood, how they pay for stuff, so let's not pretend that we're all robots. And as, you know, I think, basic as that sounds, I actually don't think that we're reminded that very often, or at least enough.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I'm still flashing back to that book and the whole everything is between your ears, right? Like it's all supposed to happen in your brain. Nothing comes from anywhere else that you might feel anything because your brain is supposed to be this emotion-free zone, which is
Yeah.
insane. That's not how it works. But yeah, you're supposed to go to school and shut off your emotions just like you're supposed to when you go to a job, It's like whose idea was this?
I
You
I
know,
would, if you can figure that out, you have a book on it.
my personal theory is that it came in with the Industrial Revolution and we all decided that we had to be more like the machines. That's my theory. I think we've been trying to mechanize ourselves ever since the steam engine, but I have no scholarship to go with that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, the idea is that we that's a very good point. I never thought of it, but like, at least in America, and I guess other civilized, Western civilizations, you're rewarded for productivity.
Right?
Productivity is not about how you feel, or I mean, it's just about getting stuff done, right?
Yeah.
So actually makes a lot of sense. I
Yeah.
know.
We're just supposed to churn out the widgets no matter how we feel, no matter what's
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah, that would not work for me,
It's not
obviously.
healthy.
No, no,
It's
it's not.
just not.
No. And actually, the widgets that we have to turn out today actually require more of the, I think, feeling brain and some of the creativity, than it did in 1920. That's, I think we need to change our reward system a little bit. So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. But I think that acknowledging that we're all human and we all come in and we all have feelings going on under the surface and,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not that it's the reality is, if you and I worked together and you were going through something and I said, how are you doing? Or do you need help? You would talk to me if you trusted me, and then we would still do our jobs. And we'd feel like,
Right.
oh, it's not like we would have a 4 hour therapy session and I'd have to go to Costco to buy a whole thing of tissues. It's just acknowledging what's going on as opposed to suppressing it and going through the day feeling like, you're just, it's just whack-a-mole. It's like I always told my kids this, you can suppress the feelings, they're going to show up somewhere. And, people want to know why sometimes, why is that person so grumpy at work all the time? Or why, it's not you. Believe me, it's not you.
Right. Yeah. So I'm just wondering how, if at all, because my supposition here could be completely wrong, but
Yeah.
how does comedy work into that for you? Do you find comedy to be an emotional outlet for things like that?
Oh my, yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, I think in much healthier ways now. Do you mean like just in general, or like in a work situation,
In
or?
in whatever way it works for you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, all the above. I mean, I think as do other creative outlets like playing piano and writing, but comedy in particular, I mean, on a hourly basis. I think when I was younger, and I wasn't popular, and like everyone's got their story or whatever, but I could use comedy as a way to deflect, or it was this, I'm not the only one. This is a very
Hmm.
common and defense mechanism, but it quickly can turn into self-deprecation, which is not great for you, me being me, and it's uncomfortable for everybody else. So that wasn't the healthiest approach. But I think, you know, over time, it's migrated to being something about it's like the best pair of glasses, because it's just something that allows me to filter just sort of the hilariousness of everything. I mean, look at when I'm getting older, things are changing, stuff is happening that I don't understand. Like there's just a perspective. And at work in particular, I think I read 90% of US companies are going through some sort of transformation or change. There's a lot more layoffs. The pandemic has completely changed the game, particularly with younger generations. These are not easy times. And I think this idea of change, and using humor to kind of accept it and make sense of it or not, to me is a game changer. I really am very, very grateful that I can look at things that way. I think where it gets just I know I'm rambling, but the
No.
one thing I would say is where it gets a little bit cautious is, and you touched on it with the DEI example, is people understanding that you can take your job seriously without taking yourself seriously. And I think that with time, over time, that's changing. But that's sometimes people interpret having a healthy sense of humor or calling things what they are as not taking the job seriously, when in fact all you're really trying to say is like, can we all admit that this is kind of screwed up, and we're going to move on. But like it's like, let's let's be honest, that type of mentality. And I think it's definitely going in the right direction.
Yeah, no, I hear that. And I actually, since I talked about this on the podcast the other week, I had a little adventure in the ER a couple weeks ago,
Yes,
and had myself a lovely shiner that just finally completely went away just a couple days
I haven't
ago. It's
seen that. I
like,
was actually wondering.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
like, now it's funny. I got so used to seeing it that now it's weird not to. But the whole time that I was there, and I was back actually for in treatment in the ER for maybe like 5 hours. That was kind of how I viewed it, because I was like, look, I will take all of your questions seriously because obviously you need to do what you're going to do. But I
Yeah.
absolutely refuse to be serious about the fact that I am in here looking like this.
Yes, and
You
and I
know?
mean, the reality is you're going to look that way whether you take it seriously or not,
Right?
right? Yeah. So obviously there's certain things that are you cannot. It's very hard to find the humor in, but something like that. I think it says a lot about you and the way this is just life. It's just gonna be messy sometimes. And I think it's one of the things I write about for our blog on VitalConex is that humor is a superpower, you know, and it's a muscle, and like creativity. I think some people go, "Oh, I'm not funny. I'm not." And actually, I think there's four types of humor and this whole thing, but everybody has the opportunity. It's fear, right? You don't have to get up on stage, but even like trying to show that side of yourself to people sometimes is a very uncomfortable, you know, premise for certain people.
Yeah. And yet, when you're sitting there in the ER and your face is swollen up
Yeah.
and you look like
Yeah.
you got beaten up by a gang,
Yeah.
or attacked by dinosaurs, or,
Yes.
aliens, or whatever, insert your
All the
favorite
story. I remember
explanation
you were
here,
saying all the stories were coming.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it was just like, I mean, really,
I mean,
it's too
there's your
absurd.
book. There's your book. We should write a story. We should write a chapter on every story about that you told about
Oh, now
your.
that could be hilarious.
Yeah.
That really could be hilarious.
It'd be so funny.
But
Yeah.
honestly, I mean, the whole time we were there was hilarious. And no doubt that was also fueled by adrenaline and sleep deprivation at that point, because it was 3
Yes.
a.m. when I got home. But still, it's just like, no way, man. No way I'm going to sit here and not laugh at this, because why not?
Yeah.
I mean, really.
Sleep deprivation and adrenaline is how most comedians get their material. So you should just go for it at this point.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
They're powerful fuel for all sorts of weird brain
Yes.
connections, for sure.
True.
So, yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming and talking to me. This was a
Thank
lot of
you.
fun. This was really
It was.
cool.
I really appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
That's this week's episode. My thanks to Marc Kaye for joining me, and to you for listening. Please leave a review for this episode. There is a link right in your podcast app, and in it, tell us about a time when humor made something easier for you. If you enjoyed our conversation, please share it with a friend. Thank you so much. If this episode resonated with you, or if you're feeling a little bit less than confident in your creative process right now, join me at The Spark on Substack as we form a community that supports and celebrates each other's creative courage. It's free, and it's also where I'll be adding programs for subscribers and listeners. The link is in your podcast app, so sign up today. See you there, and see you next week. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners.